our IG Lives Mamatortuga community friends. This is our second season, and today we are up for a treat. I just want to be sure that everything is gonna be smooth. You know, with technology, we never know how this is gonna work. But today we have an amazing thought leader, thinker, mother, community organizer, Akilah S. Richards, and we're gonna talk about her latest book, Raising Free People. So, hello, welcome to Mamatortuga, friends.
Yay! Please, thank you for having me, Joanna. I appreciate it. Can you hear and see me okay?
Yes, and I wanted to check the same. Can you hear me and everything fine? So thank you so much for doing this with us today. I know you're busy bee, but I'm so excited.
Yes, of course. Like, this is what I'm busy doing. This is the point of the book and all of my work. And, you know, like, we're in this together. So I love to be in spaces where we can chop it up, you know?
Thank you so much for accepting to be in our series. We usually do this series for all the families that are out there worldwide. And our website is bilingual, so we do a lot of like emphasis about families that are doing the transition like ours. We are an immigrant family, and a lot of the things that you talk about in your book resonated so much with me as a mother, as a deschooling entity in my life since having children. So I've been telling everyone that I know they need to read it.
That's so great to hear. And Joanna, I feel you. I also come from an immigrant family myself. You know, we're Jamaicans, and language wasn't a thing, but there were many other things that still, you know, and I came to the US as a child. And I think my decolonizing work, it wasn't because of America, because where I was too, that was a different type. It just compounded on top of each other. And so now the reason that I see unschooling as liberation work is because it's not so much about what my children or many other children that I see learn or don't learn. It's the person, it's the personal leadership inside of a system that isn't designed with us in mind. It's the sense of community and your own savvy and the trust of your own old knowledge, the people before you, over anybody telling you how valid you are based on grades inside of a system that doesn't even regard you, let alone, you know, it's like, of course this resonates because we are humans from this particular mindset and we know what liberation feels like. And then this gives us kind of the words and a little bit of the practice. And so I'm so glad to know it resonates for you because I feel you.
So here, you know, like, I know a lot of parents don't understand a lot about unschooling per se, and I did a IG live with another homeschooling family where we spoke about the different ways you can go in your own homeschooling journey. And I was explaining that unschooling is one of those journeys. Like, I don't think or feel in any way that everybody will be ready right now for unschooling. I feel that at this moment, there are a lot of us that are really willing to kind of like do this commitment because we are realizing that this is needed, not only in our communities, but in our own lives. So reading the book, you know, I was receiving a lot of feedback because a lot of, especially people in our communities, were telling me, well, but that is something that I feel I can do.
Yes.
Like, I have to work. I'm a single parent. I have to do all these things, and they're feeling so compounded. And the sad truth, especially for me, as I don't know if you know how other you know, immigrants feel. The sense of community is very fragmented. You know, like, a lot of people tell me like, oh, but I have friends since childhood, and I'm always like, oh, jealous about that because I'm like, all my childhood friends are not here. Like, I don't even talk to them anymore. and I'm still feeling like out of, sources, especially looking for community that supports that learning for my children.
Yeah, I hear that. Let's touch on that a little bit. And I
Yes.
want to shout out, I see Consent Parenting is in the building. Peace
Oh
out.
yes, my friend too.
Yes, love
Rosalia.
it. Yes, thank y'all so much for joining us, everybody who's listening and also on the replay. This topic is so important, especially this element of it being accessible, right? So the way that I see it is two things. There's the issue of access, and then the issue of feeling like you can do it, like your capacity to do it. Not whether you have the access to the people and the resources, but whether you yourself can do it. And I think that one of the many, many elements of colonization is that we mix those two things in. We think about the strategy like, okay, if I'm working outside of the home all day and I have two kids and it's just me, there's a logistical element there. But then there's also the element of, because I'm doing all of these things and I'm so busy and I'm not even free and I don't have time for myself and I don't know all the things my kids need to know, especially as somebody from another country, how could I possibly, right? So here's the thing. That second part about that, how could I possibly, that is an opportunity to decolonize, because the reality is for people who are closer to the idea of how learning actually happens, like basically non-white people in terms of how we've lived in society, even before you and me, we know that teaching doesn't happen in this linear way. It isn't like this open blank slate of a student and then the master teacher comes. Learning is from everything. Learning is from all beings. Learning is intrinsic. And as a parent, as a guardian, your observation is going to teach you a lot about how that child learns and what they need and what they're already interested in. So then, even when you have a limited observation time, because whatever time you do spend with your kid as somebody who's working. So when you find the interest of your kids, sometimes something as simple as joining a homeschooling group, right? Where there are people who can take care of your kid and say, okay, this is what we're doing. We're not teaching our kids from this curriculum. You'll often find, this is what I hear people say on the podcast, they'll find other people in places they didn't think they would find them. Sometimes you have to show up a little bit as yourself, and that's not always safe. That's the truth. But when we can, sometimes that's an invitation for other people who are doing a similar thing or thinking to find you. Then community is sometimes is your kid and one other person, or you and one other family. And then that can build out. So what I've seen is that a lot of families who struggle with not having a supportive second adult in the home, or financial support, or even elders, like parents of the adults who don't support that idea, but they support the kids financially, is that when you can find just one other person in community, that's a way for you to start to build on what's present for your child. And then things like this to help you find language for communicating it to the other people around you. So it's like, in a sense, we have to be willing to show up in service of the thing that we need, however we can, so that what we focus on can expand and we can develop more community over time. You feel me?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a lot about the vision and supporting the vision that we want to see being available for others. And actually, that's what I think, is so crucial. But I also believe that, a lot of the process of the deschooling, unschooling, and decolonizing, it starts with us as parents, as mentors. If we, like, as you said, if we don't believe we can do it, of course we're going to hear these outside voices telling us that, oh, you're not, capable, you're not educated enough, you're not doing enough, you're not a good parent. Because that's what, the society is constantly telling us.
Absolutely.
And I feel it all the time, like when I decided to raise multilingual children and, I received this backup telling me like, oh, your children won't speak English well because, you're speaking to them in other language. Or many, many times they put them in a special programs just because I put in the form that we spoke Spanish at home. So there's so many ways that, you know, in we receive these subliminal messages.
Yes, exactly.
And we believe like, no, my child has to go to this certain school because it's supposed to be like the only way for us as immigrants, as people of colors,
yes,
to do
to
something
get
in
the
life.
American dream and
Yes,
realize so we
yes.
can sound different and look different. And it's like, that's the thing too, that I've learned so much. Like, I was raised by a single mother, so I'm not a single parent. I was raised by one. And also a lot of the folks in my community get to unschooling as a result of the trauma from school. And oftentimes I have a lot of friends, particularly from the Caribbean, where, you know, you have this very specific idea of what it means to succeed. And you also have a level of honor and homage for your elders and the people who brought you here and what they survived. But in all of that, the reality is that my generation, I'm in my 40s, I'm 43, and I came here as a child. And I find that a lot of us are seeing that the amount of work, the amount of struggle that we have to do for the kid in school, it actually makes more sense for me to put that energy into something else outside that shit, because it'll never change enough for me anyway.
And this is resonating with me too so much, because seriously, I was a parent advocate in one of our dual language public schools nearby, because I believe in public education.
Yeah.
I believe in the immigrant communities, especially the Guatemala Mayan communities, being supported, because a lot of them have that mentality that only, you know, people from the outside can teach their children.
Yeah.
And the sad reality is like there's so many times that I have to be in the middle of these fights with racist administrators, with racist other parents telling things to the children,
Yes.
putting them down, diminishing their traditions. And this year, for the first time, my children, because I wanted to do deschooling for a long time, I work with, different unschooling pods, doing
Right.
Spanish support.
Yeah.
And neither of my kids were interested. They thought, oh, mom, like the homeschooling kids are kind of quirky, like, who knows, like. And this is the first year they told me, like, mom, we want to go for that. And I was like,
so
really?
That is so great, because then they get to see that it can look like whatever it needs to look like for you. And I'm so glad you brought that up, Joanna, because one of the misconceptions, particularly around unschooling, is that if you're not doing it this particular way, this one idea that your kid is involved in all the activities and that you are available to be like, oh, what's that, Billy? You're interested in science? Let's go to the museums. Like, you have to be a martyr. Like, you have to be so focused and have all the resources. When the reality is, if you have that child's consent, especially in that instance when they say, look, yeah, we want to test this out, this is an opportunity for you as a parent to now not look at bringing school at home, but to start to decolonize your idea of learning by paying attention to your kid, by offering them things you think are interesting and letting them see the way that you respect when they say no, or the way that you support when they say yes. So then those same skills that they and we lost through schoolishness of being able to connect human to human, to not think about competition, or not have a conversation with somebody and the louder thing is what they might be thinking of you, or what you pronounced wrong or said wrong, or how your hair looks, or whatever. When that stuff starts to get less and less loud, what develops is a relationship dynamic and an ecology for learning that you can't contend with that in school, and it doesn't necessarily exclude school.
Mm-hmm,
You know what I'm saying? Like, there are many people who unschooling looks like dipping into something school, something school related when that kid wants to. Or like, one of my daughters supports schooled kids with certain things. So she has a community of friends who are in school. And I would have never even thought of that. Like, my idea of supporting her was a very colonized one. It's like, I'm going to give the 5. And if that's not how any of that works. That's not how humanity works. That's not how systems that are natural and include people and all beings work. We have to come out of that. We have to snap out of this idea, because I love how you talked about the vision. That's it, Joanna. When we look at the vision, then we kind of heal the division that has come from the years of schooling.
Yes, yes. And actually, all the things that, like I was talking to a lot of parents that, like their concern is that, like, so what if I de-school my child and I realize that that's the only way? And I'm like, well, that's part of the problem.
Exactly.
Because
Exactly.
the way we are building systems and supporting systems is believing their lie. So,
Hello.
and for me, especially for me at this moment in history, being like, because believe it or not, even though I've been living in this country for so long, I still feel as an outsider. I still feel like, very out, in many different spaces. And I'm
Yeah.
always thinking like, why is that? Like, is something about me? Is there something wrong with me? And I'm realizing more and more with people like you and organizations like you that are like, no, we're just trying to figure
Exactly.
out what is outside of this system that is ruling only for certain people and not ruling for all people. And
Exactly.
it's an issue. And
And
for
so many
me,
of us have that experience. So many of us have that experience. Like
yes,
we
so we're
can't
not
invalidate
crazy.
it.
Because
Thank
that's the
you.
other thing. Like they're trying to make like how many times how many people have told me like, oh my gosh, but Joanna, you're exaggerating. Or you're just making it up. Or I'm
Or
like,
that's how it is. Or
no,
you gotta
that
figure
aggression
that out.
happened.
Yes,
That
they try to
diminishing
tell you that.
behavior happened. And seriously, what I was gonna say about like the pandemic for me was like a peace of mind. Finally, I didn't have to deal with that stuff coming from the school.
That's
Like
real.
how many times have I go, and ask for certain something, going to even to the school board, and their answers were totally like, oh, we cannot do anything about this. And I'm like, so if you guys cannot do anything about violence in school, about racism in school, who is supposed to do something about it?
No one. Everyone is just supposed to contort themselves. And this is what I really wanted to convey in the book. It wasn't a message of everyone needs to be unschooling. It was a matter of who is it? Some people say that unschooling isn't for everybody. And my question is always, who is consent and liberation not for?
Mm-hmm.
Like that, I think that's absurd. I think the design of it needs to be really organic for each family, and that we need a lot more people like you and me and so many of us who are like willing to be vocal about it, because it's not always safe to do that, willing to be in community with people and offer examples of it and amplify examples of it. This is what we have to do, because we can either continue to ask the questions about how the system is going to change and let generations and generations pass, or we do what we do and we step outside of it and say, what do I know now? What do I trust now? And it gives other people permission to do the same. For example, I'll share something with you that I haven't even shared with you yet in our communication. So the way that you do the bilingual with English and Spanish, that's something that now I do with my podcast. Like every post that we have has that. And I've seen it before, but it's like being in communication with you and talking about the connection made me realize, wait a minute, there are people on my team who can do this. I can find out whether this is even more labor intensive. And my friend who does it, Daniela, she's like, actually, it doesn't take me much more time at all. But look how much more accessible it makes it now. And you gave that permission with that simple thing. This is kind of how learning and society and working together as human beings and real to real, eye to eye, that's how those things show up. That's just one small example.
Yes, yes. And that is what it's about life. Like being willing to really learn from each other at different levels, because that's something that is very important for me and my children.
Yeah.
But bottom line, I wanted to highlight the book because I feel like a lot of people, like want to have a conversation with you about like, oh, so how do you unschool? How do you do this or how do you do that? And I've been trying to tell them, well, it's a journey. It's not like not going to happen like one day you're gonna wake up and oh, we're homeschoolers and we're gonna
Yep.
do it this
That's what
way,
it's
because
done.
that's exactly what it is not about. Like and
Thank
and
you.
bottom line, you can do homeschooling many different ways, and there's no judgment into that, because like what you just said, that there's some parents that are very, like, let's do the lesson in mushrooms, and let's do like these beautiful handicrafts, and they go, like they go all the way, and that's so cool. But what about the people who are not that way? So bottom line, it's an invitation for everyone who knows in their heart that is the school system did not bring them any joy. Why putting their kids through that? And that story is in this book. Like that happened to Akilah and her partner and her children in this book. And you can read it all. Like she tells it all. It's from the beginning how it happened, because there were some couple who were really into like schooling. Like they thought, oh my gosh, yeah, they have to go to this amazing school and they have to learn all these things. But what happened while they were parenting and parenting themselves that made them come into this journey? And she's been doing it now for several years, and now she even has like her own team. Can you let us know a little bit more about this amazing network for people who haven't get yet in the podcast yet?
Thank you so much. I love everything that you just said, especially that element of the fact that this is like one story. And in the book are actually several stories from the podcast about different people and how they got to unschooling. So I started the podcast, it's called Fare of the Free Child, in the summer of 2016. And it was actually like many things that really evolved my life. It was from a space of anger. And that's another thing that unschooling and deschooling has helped me to embrace, my anger. That is what love looks like for me sometimes. And in this skin, in this body where I was born on this planet, I believe that my anger, like the way that pervasive whiteness tries to wrestle that from me, and my capacity to recognize that it's mine, is a part of why unschooling is effective for me, truly, because my anger is mine and I know what to do with it. And so this book is also about what my anger looks like when I turn it into, a direction. So I started the podcast in 2016 when Philando Castile and Alton Sterling were murdered. And I was getting emails from parents who had read, I was always writing about unschooling and my own like journey of radical self-expression and how I was learning so much from my daughters. Like it was really an evolutionary process for me, and I've been writing about it for many years. And so people who were following me from the things that I wrote about were saying, see, Akilah, this is why we don't think that our children can actually be free, because we're not even safe, like you can't. And then that made me so angry. And I was like, I hear that. I definitely hear that. And I also feel like if we allow that to guide us, then we might as well be, colonized at the levels that we were before, when our physical bodies, which some of us still are. Like it made me feel like I needed to get louder about what I was learning, which was unschooling and deschooling, even though I didn't even fully understand it yet. I'm like, I don't care. We just need to talk about this shit. So I started this podcast, and just like with our connection, so many people were like, yo, me too. This shit is pissing me off too. This is what I learned. Like it just became this thing. Then I started getting invited to a bunch of different communities to talk about it, because other people were already talking about it and experiencing it. And because I'm a writer and words are one of my gifts, it offered a lot of people like language to convey it to other people in their communities, that then converted into support. And then I was like, okay, this is great. I want to continue this. So then, as always in my life, so much of my work is connected to working with other, particularly Black and brown women who are doing their own liberation work. So then as my podcast grew and people were supporting me on Patreon, and I started to actually get paid for my work, then I could bring other people in and say, you know what I'm saying?
Because I'm in the struggle right now, my love. I'm into this. Like I've been trying to break my head and fighting with my own self about like I need to be paid, because I do all these things and I've been doing it for years. and now that a pandemic has to start to realize that my family needs to eat as well. Like I cannot do the stuff that I was hustling outside of the home. And you know, people, it's so funny because people just tell me like, oh, but you don't work. I'm like, wait a minute.
Right, like
that is a total lie.
Right. Exactly. You're doing work at so many levels that you can't even distinguish. And that's exactly what I was doing.
Yeah, I work even more than most people. It's just that I don't receive a payment check weekly like most of you do. So that's where I'm kind of like trying to reclaim it. But, you know, bottom line for a lot of, you know, immigrants like me, it's like a lot of, like a joke, I have to say, because a lot of people tell me like, but you have to go and clean houses or you have to do it. And I'm like, wait a minute, I've been doing this work for so long. Not only that, tending my garden, doing my family work. And you want to tell me that I have to work and clean houses because I did it, you know, I have, and I feel ashamed.
Let me tell you something. I wanna stop you, and I realize that I'm interrupting you, but it feels so important, sis, that we recognize that a part of that same feeling of like people telling us what we should be doing based on their ideas of what people like us do, you know, and it looks different for us, but it's a similar thing in terms of like, the bottom line is that when in this country, we are various versions of help. And that's how we are seen. Like we're to build and grow things, but we are not here to thrive. So the more, that was a part of my major deschooling work, the more I try to fit myself into the idea of success that's rooted in the American dream, the worse I feel about myself, the more divided I am from my family, the more other people's judgment of what I should be doing actually stays in my head, right? Meanwhile, I'm working so hard, but people don't even recognize it. So a reason I wanted to interrupt you was to say this. That's very much the space that I was in. But what I knew how to do, again, the old knowledge that's before and beyond schooling, is that I knew that at whatever level, if I could just manage to be consistent, right? Like whatever my version of consistent was. So I was creating online courses that were like $5, you know, because it was just audio. I was doing, make sure it's not, I was doing, you know, webinars before Zoom made it easy to do them. Like I was just like, you know what I believe in is this. So I'm going to figure out how, and then I had to just do things on the side. But again, my anger and the sense of community that came from that authentic expression of that anger, coupled with the tools and the knowledge that I'd gained from working so hard for so long, is what caused this to be, because it's not like I'm saying anything different than I've been saying for all the other years. But I have also support, which is what I was saying about the network. And so now I get to pour into other people. So Raising Free People Network is other Black and brown women who needed exactly all I needed, which was a little financial support, like somebody to handle the editing. And I got that through community because Patreon covered that, because people could connect with what I was saying. Then it just grew it. And then the podcast then created this whole network of people who are doing their own liberation work. And that's what we do now. Like we just want to infiltrate a bunch of different spaces with the different ways that we are seeing and learning and living liberation. And it doesn't mean it's perfect and we're free from all things, but we are free from a lot of shit that held us down before. And, and we're free to be available for young people so that their rights aren't in the, you know, we don't think their rights are in the way.
Yes, and actually I wanted to talk, have a conversation about that, because I believe that a lot of parents don't realize that, you know, in educating our own children, we have to rewire our own ideas about education and how to raise children. And it's something that is constant, something that happened to a lot of us because of, you know, our background and the way we were taught ourselves. You know, it was totally different. So a lot of the work, especially, you know, my friends from Latinx parenting and consent parenting are doing, especially in the Latinx community at this moment, is so crucial for me, because I feel that we are still so colonized. as a community. And we are seeing
Yeah.
it in so many ways. But one of those ways is like thinking that power and control over our young people is the way to raise them well or
Right.
treat them well. And
Right.
we're
Keep
giving
them
that
safe.
power to institutions that do not care for our children. Clearly, I'm talking here about educational and military. You know, because in my mind always comes, you know, like the time that I had to stand up in our school board because the recruiters wanted to come to our meetings for our, you know, people of, you know, multicultural. And I told them, no, you're not coming here because you guys go already to all the schools. Like this space is to talk to parents about different other educational means for educating your children, not to have to send them to military, period. And they accused me of being anti-patriotic. Actually, it was terrible. I had to renounce the position of being the president of that little pot. And because nobody did anything, like they let that person put me on the ground and tell me that I was anti-patriotic because I didn't let the recruiters come to our meetings. So, and that was another Latina mom.
Yeah.
Believe it or not. So, so that is an issue for me.
Yeah,
That's
it
like a huge thing that we are creating in our own communities because we are not siding with our children. And let's remember what happened to our beautiful Guillen, like the girl who was killed in a military base, and till this day we don't know what happened.
Yep.
And the mom, you know, her words, you know, like I sent her there thinking that she was gonna be safe, and she never came back.
Right.
So I'm thinking about all this because I'm also enraged, but we need to find ways to really help the next generations. And that's what is propelling us to do these books, these IG lives, these connections, because it's not about us, it's about the young people, for them to have like really safe spaces for them to be who they are, which is amazing.
Yes, and we're in the way of that. Like when we get in the way of that, and it's not, you know, the reasons that we're in the way are almost never ill-intended, but the reality is that's what's happening. And that I also know that for me, the attention that I pay to my children, what I learned from them, and I have two daughters, they're 16 and 14, so much of my own liberation is coming from being in partnership with them. Like when I stopped, for example, hitting my daughters, which I did at first, because in my mind, like I'm raising Black girls, like they can't be out there crazy. They can't, you know, they gotta know the real deal, blah, blah, blah. But then I realized, just like how that other Latina mom was the one, I was being the same thing that I was trying to protect them from, because I'm saying that this is a safe place, me, and I'm saying I care for you and that you matter. And then I'm also gonna be violent to your body. Like, what? You know, but my mind before didn't make that. I talk about that in the book. I was like, I never even made the distinction, but once I did, because I got permission from another mom when I was on the Steve Harvey show and heard her talk about it, and I realized that I was judging her. Meanwhile, I was doing the same thing. Mine just wasn't on the street somewhere, you know? And I was like, wait a minute, that's me coming right back to, as I mentioned in the book, that slave master mentality, that physical violence is how you make someone respect or regard you. That ain't even us. We do not get down like that. That's some pervasive white stuff. So I learned so much about
colonization 101. And like we need to understand that that's kind of like the tragic reality where a lot of us were, you know, growing up, because I did grow up in that. And when we had children, you know, we weren't really prepared. But I don't know if it's this blessing of the new generations. And I don't know if that happened to you as well. But for me, having my children looking me eye to eye and telling me like, Mom, you're a hypocrite because you do this and this and you tell this and this. And I'm looking at them. They're my kids and they're calling me out.
Yep.
And they're telling me, and I wonder if, like we are so blessed to have this
Of
generation.
course. Of course. Because I say it all the time. I'm like, if my daughters weren't like aggressive, and I mean, I feel like it's so crazy that they had to be so consistently aggressive about their boundaries and their rights, and before I could even listen, let alone honor. You know what I'm saying? Like they were in school for 2 years before I was like, okay, for real, for real. If I do not honor what they're saying, then I'm just an extension of the system. Then they shouldn't trust me then. It took all of that, Joanna, for me to be like, to just stop. And then when we stopped, we just did school at home. I talk about that in the book too. Let me not front like I was just like, yeah, and we got it and we deschooled and everything. Now, I was just doing the same thing. So was Chris at home. We're like, all right, study this, study that. And then in the book, I talk about how we transitioned and then how now, my God, they're amazing. And we know so many other unschooled kids who are, my girls are bilingual. I am not. I'm still learning. Chris is not either. Like they are self-taught in that way. They know so many things about so many things as a result of being in community with their interest and with consent and with support. That's the model for living and learning going forward. We get to transition out of this foolishness about little blocks of time with little topics that don't include a bunch of different cultures over into a fully immersive, collaborative, emergent way of communal exploration and these types of conversations and curiosity that leads to different communities, that leads to different practices. Like, this is what we get to do now to wake up out of that shit that we've all had to take on for so long. We don't have to anymore. And that's what I'm excited about.
Yes, and that's where we want to invite everyone, like in this conversation. Actually, I've been thinking a lot about, translating a lot of the things that we've been going through. I tried to do like translation for the YouTube channel for most of our conversations in our website, because I think it's so important that we start giving out this message in Spanish as well, if we have means, because I see so much of this lie of the American dream and, thinking like, yes, here's the thing. I know how hard it is for a lot of the immigrants to make it to this country. And I know like the lie that is built upon, to justify all the things that happen in the middle of it, because they have to take a lot of hard work and injustice in order for them to provide for themselves and their families abroad. So of course, for them, it's hard to see the hard truth. Like it's a type of mechanism. But in many instances, what I've been trying, especially to tell parents that, reach out to me as in my position of parent advocate, it's like, no, you are the only person who can advocate for your child.
Yeah.
Nobody else is going to do it. Don't believe the person in the school. Don't believe, like only you. And it doesn't matter if you don't speak Spanish or English. There is a right for you as a parent to go to the school and say, I don't want my kid to be in this program, or I don't feel, and they have to find a translator because that is in the law.
And look how come and as long as school has been a thing, and as long as, I mean, this entire country, when we talk about the US, is full, who's American is barely here anymore, right? So everyone is from somewhere, yet the school system still hasn't normalized translations for Spanish, dude, let alone other languages. That, my friends, is an example of exactly why we cannot continue to invest in that. Because I'll tell you what, in a community, if you're operating in a co-op, best believe it's going to be an organic part of it because people speak the language and we want to communicate. And so now we are unlearning these colonizer behaviors. So when we have gatherings and websites, and now we have to even get reminders from people like Joanna to say, can you put it in a couple of languages? Is that feasible? Actually, yes. Like, we're relearning how to be human together now as a result of these things. That's why I'm so excited about what you're doing and why you share it, because you're so right. Many of us don't even have the space to think outside of the thing that, you know, what we were sold. That's why we don't need to try to convince. We need to make sure we amplify examples and where we can.
Yes. Model in our communities and support the people that we can, because sadly we are not, you know, like for example, so many times I wish I can, you know, create a school and, you know, tell all the parents that are working, you know, like bring them here, but that is not in my capacity of doing at this moment. But in envisioning in the future, let's hope for envisioning and, you know, in creating more co-ops that are open for those parents that are working themselves as well.
Yes.
And colonizing themselves and saying, hey, I want to be real with the raising of my children, and I want them to break free from the things that I grew up with. So there's so many layers at this point, and I wish one day raising free children is gonna be in Spanish. So here I'm envisioning.
Multiple. Yeah, that's yo. And there's a gathering. I'm gonna make sure I send you the link to Joanna, because there's a gathering that myself and Zakia Ishmael and Kelly Limes Taylor, we are co-facilitating the organizing of a gathering, an earthwide gathering, and we're trying to do it in as many languages as possible. And this is what we talk about when we say a vision of something different, because our colonized idea of even organizing a thing is like, when would I have time? When would I hold the pieces so people don't feel? But now, as unschoolers, we're saying, no, if we get together with just what you said, just communicating that need and embodying that example where we can, then we can get together and say, wait a minute, Joanna, I know how much you work, but here's my strong suit. I'll just do this. And then since I don't speak Spanish, then I'm going to set it up in this system for you here. And then you could just check it. That'll take 2 hours instead of 22. Like, we're relearning how to do all sorts of organizing together, because school taught us this one way. And now there's something totally, many different configurations.
And I love what you're saying, because that's something that I always say, especially with activism, that it has to be intersectional loves. We need to show solidarity. You cannot always choose the people in your own team. You have to acknowledge people in other teams that are working as hard as you are working, and your teams, because that's another thing that, you know, bothers me. I feel like, you know, bottom line, I resonate with your message, Akilah. I resonate with the message of consent parenting, Latinx parenting. All of them are my sisters. It's the same as you. And if I ever need something, you know, that I'm, you know, amplifying their message, anything, supporting their message, it's for my own benefit as well. Because that's true solidarity. It's not like, oh my gosh, why do I have to always have my buddies and my friends? Because that real unschooling, and that's the beauty of it, and that's how I see it. It's like we are all in this together. Of course, we cannot cover up all, but you're doing your net there, I'm doing my net here, and one day we're gonna have a net that is gonna be that big, and we're all going to be like connecting those points. And guess who are going to be navigating those nets? The next generations, because they won't be afraid. They will be like, oh, my mama told me, or my mentor told me. Oh, that's what we can do. We can create our own economy. We can create our own jobs. We can create our own Harvard.
Yes, they got what we tell them, and they got what they intuit as well. Because let's not forget, like, they are their own deep wells of knowledge as well. That's the thing. Like, we need to remember the directions that knowledge flows. It flows in all directions. So we get so caught up in teaching them, like the way all these other systems needed to teach us to be different. But your organic self does not need to be taught a thing. You can be taught skills, but the allowance and the emergence brings so much. That's why I love what you're saying, because it takes us away from the schoolish idea of competition. Like, how could there possibly be competition?
Yes.
We're all in this together in our own ways. I need you to talk to people who won't connect with me the same with the message. You need me. I need Leslie. I like all of these things. Like, we need especially as non-white people. Like for our voices to not get translated into somebody else's idea of what the hell we saying, we got to make sure we're supporting each other and ourselves in making sure people don't say it for us, because they don't say it all kind of ways wrong.
And showing up for each other, bottom line. Like that's something that in mamatortuga I've been trying to kind of like be very vocal about it. And some people tell me, but why do you do this? You're not Black. I'm like, well, I don't have to be Black to care about this. Because bottom line, it bothers me and affects me, because for me, like they can be my children as well.
Of course.
And you know, bottom line, Latinx is not a race. There are Latinx that are Black. There are Latinx that are Asian. Because there are all kinds of Latinx out there. And my kids are also biracial. So they, you know, there's so many layers. And I don't have to kind of like justify every layer that what I do, or, you know, but for me, it's so important to have essence. Like if you're doing something, just don't do it because, oh, you think it's cool or fashionable, or, oh, I think, you know, it was trending. Do it because it's something that you're understanding from your heart. And education for children must be something that for every parent should be something that, you know, like we are so committed, because we are realizing more than ever. Like, and I think one of your guests from the podcast said it, and I'm sorry, I don't remember her name, but she said it. Now more than ever, we are realizing that what our kids were learning in school doesn't have anything to do what they need to be in life, like what they need to survive and thrive in life. So what are we teaching children? And I was like, whoa.
It's the opposite. Like, not only are they not learning what they need, actually so much of what they're learning makes living and togethering with other humans harder. To me, Joanna, that's even worse, because if it was at least not doing any harm, it is actually harmful. It actually makes us view each other in this very dehumanized way. So that's why I say all the time, we can't keep using tools of oppression and expect to raise free people, because these tools of oppression are these very ideas that we use to like judge ourselves and each other. And it's like, dude, your worth is not tied to that. That kid's worth is not tied to that.
Yeah, and we shouldn't be even thinking that way, but that's kind of like the system's way of working, which is telling you like, oh, so giving them more power means less power to you. That's not true. That is not true. We come all to this earth with our own power, and stop coveting the power of someone else and destroying the power that other people have, especially your children. Because seriously, they are here for blessings. We decided to bring them here. So we should be treating them as blessings. And humbly, I am accepting that I'm into this journey, not being perfect, because I'm far away from perfect, but I'm trying my best to either listen to my children, listen to myself in my own intuition. And this year, seriously, the last thing that I wanted to do was go back to that school, because I suffered so much, so many attacks, so much stress. And the last answer that I got from the school board was like, next time you have an issue with violence in school, call 911.
Okay.
And for me, that was like, how dare you to give me that, you know, answer?
An ultimatum too. It's just kind of like, it's the most dismissive thing, actually not an ultimatum, the most dismissive thing ever. Like whatever, because first of all, when they come, who are they for? What are the, like, they know that. So
and they're kids, they're children, they're not even adults. So who is teaching these children that attacking another child the same age is violence? It's not like asserting in their power. It's not making it better for them. Certainly it's branding them, because that's how the same school is looking at them. And that's another issue. Like for me, it's like, how many of these amazing kids, what the only thing they need is a person, an adult, a mentor who really listens to them.
Period. Like that's it. Someone who humanizes them and doesn't see them as a thing that needs to be fixed, which is how, as society across the board, that's how we view children and childhood. Therefore, that's also how we understand power. Therefore, that's also how we try to put power on somebody. Therefore, that's why a lot of our relationships are not about people and humans, they're about processes and trying to contort ourselves to fit into a process that didn't even consider humans. It looked at an end result. So to
what can I get out of you? Because that's the other pervasive form of it, you know, even from parents to children. And actually in the Latinx community, that happens a lot with parents, you know, forcing emotionally, even physically, their children to tell them that they have an obligation with them to give them money or to, you know, like be in spaces that are not safe for them just because they're family. So that has a lot to do with the work we need to do ourselves as adults. We call ourselves as adults. And that's something that's why I support a lot of, you know, different websites and different accounts that I think like they're doing that. They're community friends for our mamatortuga, because bottom line, not one person can do these. All of us are here to perform what we are supposed to do, and we are not afraid of. And that's the beauty of it. And that's why we are troublesome.
That's what it's going to be. And that's why, because all of us will not be or feel safe to speak up. And so for those of us, whatever blessings we have that allow us to be able to do it, we have to do it. And our activism, our organizing, our care, our love, our liberation work looks like different things for different people. So the person who's just talking to one person, that is just as important as this. So if there's a way to amplify that, like this is what we are learning as we decolonize. The value in each of the humans around us, especially the young ones, because they're the easiest ones for us to just tuck in a little corner, because our own insecurities show up as well too. So as we decolonize, those insecurities become really obvious for what they are, and then they are less weapons to our children and more tools for our liberation. And that's what this work is. That's what this work is.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Akilah, for doing that. Thank you so much for amplifying the voice of others as well. I have enjoyed your podcast for a while now, and I know a lot of people who do. I think it's unfortunate that a lot of people think like, oh, but that's not for me. Because I always say like, well, even if you are not considering unschooling, please listen to what Akilah has to say about, in general, about education and in general about validation in this society. Because I think a lot of people, especially in, you know, older academic circles, are suffering the leftover of that type of mentality.
A lot of recovering academics.
No, I'm not even going to go into the economic side of the academics, because that's another, you know, like a huge trap for a lot of people in our communities that are wanting so much money to the government for things that, you know, in my mind, like, education should be free for the people who really wants to be educated, period. You know, like medicine should be free. Medicine should be free. You know, these people should be supported by the same community that is receiving. And the bottom line, United States of America think like they're so forward, but there are a lot of places in Latin America that they already have free school. And you know what they ask? The only thing they ask is like, when the people graduate, they have to serve their community for a few years before they move on to their practices. Period. That's perfect.
Come on. So I see now, Joanna, first of all, you're welcome and thank you. And I'd love to have you on the podcast too, because that conversation around the economic side of this educational industrial complex, I'd love to talk about that on the podcast.
Oh, I have so many insider talks about this, especially with the huge grants that are given to academic institutions, including public schools, and who is behind the services that they provide to the children.
Right.
So that was my issue. I went to the school board to ask, like, so you guys have this grant from the Florida state giving you after what happened in Stone Douglas, you know, the horrible killing spree. And they say, oh yes, we're going to start doing more, you know, social work with the children, and we're going to allocate all these millions, you know, for mental health. Mental health? Seriously, are you kidding me? How much money are they really investing in guns and armed people in the school campus? And my children had to go through these simulacros, you know, like when they have to pretend that, you know, somebody was getting attacked in the campus. And that's something that I always say, like, I grew up in the 80s and 90s in Colombia, in Bogota. And a lot of people that love guns here in the United States don't have ever seen something like it, you know, I always say to them, like, you have seen only movies. You have never lived or seen your friends being dead in the street.
The reality.
So I have a trauma with this killing machine. And for me, like, having spaces for education where our children have to be afraid of something like that happening in a like a developed country, and with thinking like that's a normal incident, like it doesn't matter. Like,
and we need to be respectful to those same people as well, and show up a certain, like, think about how traumatic that has to be. And you don't have to think about it because you know, like, what is the message we're sending when we're saying, we know that you're not safe there. Also be respectful. Also look like this, sound like. We have got to figure out what it looks like more and more to divest from that thing and invest in what makes sense for what we can build. So thank you so much for being part of that.
Yeah, because actually that has a lot to do with our mental health. No wonder so many of our children don't even have a fair mental health care because of all these systems that are in order. And so I went to the school board. I asked them, like, where are the millions that you guys said that you were going to devote for these, you know, school partners instead of putting the teachers, you know, because that's the other side. You know, some of the teachers, I'm not going to say all of them, but some of the teachers are really trying their best, but they are not therapists. They're not social workers. They cannot do this by themselves.
And they were affected by it too. They have a lot of teachers that have their own trauma.
And their answer was, well, we don't have all the funds because we already devoted the funds for cameras and guns and more tanks and all these. And that's where they told me, you have to call 911 instead of, you know, like telling me, like, perhaps we can do something about it. Perhaps we can collect more.
What incentive would they have to do something about it? Because they don't care. Why would they say that? We have to even stop thinking like that, because the system never. Community and school sometimes are synonymous and historically have been useful, but nowadays we have to reconstruct that together because we can't rely on that thing.
And it's a shame because I always said, like, there's no better place where you can reach out to other families and support kids. And, you know, that's why, you know, I'm doing homeschooling, this schooling right now, because both of my kids agree, they're into it. But in my heart, and that's one of my huge criticisms for the homeschooling community, and I have always been vocal about it. It's like, we cannot forget about the children that are not being homeschooled. We cannot forget about doing activism in our local educational systems. Show up for those meetings.
And
anyone can go to those meetings. Anyone, please go to your staff.
If you can, because again, we have to think about, again, that like full spectrum perspective. Like, yes, for those of us who can, but also school has been such a source of trauma. I also think we have to be careful about trying to get people who are trying to survive outside of a thing to stay invested in it. The way that I do it is like, I'm not invested in the system, but I'm invested in the people. So I'm talking to the parents about relationship with kids, because I don't give a shit about the school, but I care about the people in it. I
do
don't
care
have a
about the people
romanticized
that are
idea.
in it.
So,
And
so that's
it
what we have to
bothers
think
me
about.
so
Yeah,
greatly that, you know, like so many times we can form our bubbles. And I
exactly.
see
And
it
leave
all the
out.
time, you know, like, oh, and I'm doing this beautiful, you know, castle. Oh my gosh, we're getting caught, Akilah. I don't know, how do you feel? Do you want to go back, or
The
should we
time.
cut it here? How is your schedule?
We're good. I do have something after this, so an hour is good for me. That's what I had planned.
Okay, so
So
thank
yeah.
you so much for your conversation. And I'll
You're
tell
welcome.
everybody I'm going to be posting this on our
Thank
website
you.
and our YouTube channel. Remember to get in the